All right. What I'm going to say today, you may have heard it before to a great extent. Next Sunday, the Father Solanus Casey will be beatified. He'll become blessed. And that ceremony is going to take place in Detroit, where he died and where his remains now are. And you may remember back at the Oriwa Formation Day in March, Janice Witherford spoke about him, and she had quite a long talk there, and gave a very good presentation of his life and of his spirituality. But I thought just because he's about to be beatified, it might be a good idea to recall something about him, and particularly those virtues that are Franciscan and that therefore we also can practice if we are following our Franciscan rule. Before he joined the Capuchins, Father Solanus, by the way, he was the sixth child in a family of 16, and he, at a very young age, he got diphtheria, and had that affected him a bit later on as well. But before he joined the Capuchins, he went to the diocesan seminary and spent about 5 years studying. He found it very difficult because the lectures were in German and Latin, and he didn't really have a good basic education in languages especially, so this made it very difficult for him to understand what was being said. And so he didn't seem to progress very well. And the rector of the seminary, or the one who was in charge, suggested to him that maybe he should try a religious order. I presume this man was thinking of him going as a lay brother to one of the orders. He did make inquiries of the Jesuits, of the OFMs, and of the Capuchins, and decided to join the Capuchin order after a lot of prayer, I should say, in which his mother and his sister also joined. He decided to try the Capuchins and made his mind up on that on the 8th of December, the feast of the Immaculate Conception. So he joined the Capuchins in Detroit, but there too many of the friars, or most of them, were German speaking. And again, he had that problem with the lectures, the Latin and the German language. And so he didn't really there make any great progress as well. That was why it was decided when his ordination came, they didn't want to turn him out because they saw that he was a very holy man. He had been right through his studies, and so they decided to ordain him, but not give him the power or the faculties for hearing confessions or preaching in the strict sense, that's preaching doctrine. So he was ordained as what we would call a simplex priest. That was the official word for it. But it's interesting that his rector said at the time when he was to be ordained, "We shall ordain Brother Solanus a priest, and as a priest he will be for the people a kind of Curé of Ars." The Curé of Ars, St. John Mary Vianney. he saw him as someone very similar to him. So obviously his holiness and his spirituality had made a big impression on the friars there, and that remained with him, because even though he had not learning or preaching, people flocked to him later. Once he was appointed to his work, first of all as a sacristan in Yonkers, and also as a spiritual guide for the ladies' sodality there, and also for conducting a special novena that was held every Wednesday. But the people began to flock to him, and this deepened indeed once he was transferred to Manhattan and was appointed the assistant porter, doorkeeper there. The doorkeeper, by the way, was also the tailor of the community and was quite busy. And so the people, once they met Father Solanus, they would knock at the door and they'd say, "We want to speak with the assistant porter." So the other man was, I suppose, not there half the time anyway, but it was Father Solanus they were looking for. Now, there's the first thing we have about Solanus, the way in which he accepted the decision of his superiors at that time, because there's no doubt at all, not being able to hear confessions especially, and not being able to preach, that was a great cross for him, and it was probably throughout his life. But he humbly accepted it, he bore it patiently, and he came to realize that no matter what he was doing, God was with him and he could serve God. So he had a wonderful trust, a heroic trust really, in God and in God's will. And so we have his humility, we have that deep trust in God that he developed. And like other saints, he shows us, as our own Minister General said in a letter he has just recently sent around, he said, he shows us that when we, with our human freedom, accept God's plan for us with love and trust, a new human being is born, free of self, able to savour and live the fruits of the redemption. We get a freedom from humbly accepting God's will. And even during his novitiate, even when he joined the order first, of course he was a little bit later than most of them at that time, because he had spent already 5 years in the diocesan seminary, but in the novitiate he noted 3 goals which he aimed at. First was to give glory to God, the second to be attentive in listening to Jesus, and the third to commit himself to the salvation of souls. So, as a porter, doorkeeper at the friary in Manhattan from 1918 till 1924, and then in Detroit from 1924 until 1945, that was a long period of over 20 years, he showed a spirit especially of welcome, always at peace. He wasn't disturbed really by no matter what was happening. He was a supreme example really of hospitality and of charity. And this is what brought really the increasing numbers to him. his counsel, his advice, particularly his promise of prayer for them, because many of them began to experience the graces received through his prayer. And the superiors were noticing this as well, because in 1923, that was while he was still at Manhattan, he was told to write down in a notebook any graces or favours that were granted by God. Now, he would see them obviously just as favours given by God to these people for whom he prayed, but the superiors probably had in mind, that maybe eventually they would need this if his cause for beatification ever came up later on. That may have been the reason why they asked him to do that, so that there would be a record of it. And there are numerous graces and favours received through the intercession of Father Solanus. Moreover, he noted the sufferings and the difficulties of people very carefully. He was in charge of the cards and the enrollment cards that we now call the Capuchin Missionary Association, or in some places still the Seraphic Mass Association. It's kind of a society that people are enrolled in, living or deceased, in which they share in the masses and prayers of all the Capuchin friars, and some special masses are offered every year for them. And he not only just noted the names, but he also noted the petitions, what they were wanting, what their intentions were. And he prayed for all of those. So that's Father Solanus. He was eventually transferred from Detroit to another place, even out in the country, because his health was a little bit of a problem as well, and they thought that maybe he was being overworked, and so they moved him away. But people before long found out where he was and began to follow him. Eventually he died, but as we all do, but he was 87 years old. He was born in 1870. He died in 1957 on the 31st of July. And sometime later his remains were exhumed and put into a tomb or a grave in the church there, the Capuchin Church in Detroit, and that's where he is still. And it's so next November the 18th he will be beatified there. And I think we can learn just by reflecting a bit on the humility, the trust in God. And that trust in God was so strong that he advised people, give thanks to God, give thanks ahead of time. In other words, give thanks in the confidence that God will bless you. And if we can have that same faith and humility and trust, we're certainly following St. Francis of Assisi as well. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.